And so I just want to thank everyone for submitting questions, for sharing the posts on social media, for your engagement on this topic. We have a list of questions that we have developed are kind of gotten from folks. And so we will make sure to ask those questions this evening. If we don't, just give us a nudge and we'll make sure to. We are going to, we have three guest organizations today. We have Abundant Housing Los Angeles, Inner City Law Center, and the Tenants Law Firm with us today. This is the first panel we're doing of this kind for the Palms NC. So thank you for kind of helping us and kind of dealing with the logistical kind of detail that we're dealing with. But it's our first time, so thank you for joining us in this inaugural panel. It's our intention to have more of these events throughout the year. And so this committee, the Renters Support and Affordable Housing Advocacy Committee, is the newest committee for the Palms NC. In the Palms NC, we have various committees that meet throughout the month to focus on different areas that are important for Palms. So for instance, we have a Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, we have an Outreach Committee, we have we have lots of committees. And so this is the newest one. And so our committees typically meet monthly. And so this committee meets monthly. Our goal, one of our goals for this committee is to not only to be a resource for residents of Palm. So when folks have questions, they're dealing with kind of challenges when it related to either affordable housing or renters' needs as a renter or a tenant. And then we also want to make sure that we can build our own bandwidth and learn. And also bring resources straight to our community so that folks can hear from experts, hear from folks who are actually engaged in the work, and be able to learn about services that various organizations and nonprofits across Los Angeles provide for Angelenos. And so, as I mentioned, this is our first time. And so I just began reaching out to our organizations to say, hey, we're a new committee. Would you like to come talk with us, please? We'd love to hear more about what you do. And so thank you to, as I mentioned, Abundant Housing LA, Inner City Law Center, and the Tenants Law Firm for being our first responses. I'm our first panelists who I'm able to share about the amazing work that they do in Los Angeles. So I'm going to go ahead and promote each of our panelists, two panelists from the audience. And then we have a presentation that we'll share with you. And we'll allow our panelists to share about their work. All right, so now we are using a webinar format. Typically, these meetings are not in webinar format. Oftentimes we use them Zoom meeting format, but just because we have a presentation, we collected questions, and we want to make sure that we can also share this meeting with other folks after the meeting is over. So we are going to record the meeting today, and then try to kind of create some short video clips that we can share on Instagram Reels and different places. And so that's why there are less people on the Zoom screen than you might normally see for this meeting. And so I'm going to pass it over to my co-chair, and I'm going to screen share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Randall. So yes, as Randall kindly mentioned, we've put together the following presentation, just as, you know, an overall guidelines. Thank you to all the stakeholders that submitted questions. We really appreciated them. We also included questions that as committee members, you know, we're looking at all of the wonderful organizations that volunteered, just questions, you know, that were guided towards their level and areas of expertise. So I'll go ahead and let that get back on the screen.
Yeah, so I'm just going to download it. Give me 1 second. All right, that's better.
Wonderful. So to kick us off, and Randall, if you can go to the next screenshot, we're just going to go ahead and start with allowing our wonderful panelists to kind of speak to their organizations. Up first is Abundant Housing LA. If you could please just share with us what your organization does, as well as introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Hi, my name is Leonora Kamner. I'm Executive Director of Abundant Housing LA. We're a pro-housing outreach and advocacy organization. Our mission is housing abundance. I have a few slides about the organization and sort of why our mission is relevant to renters, if that's helpful and you want me to share that. Okay, great.
Definitely.
Great. Um, so All right, so this is a really short presentation about why the connection between housing abundance and improving affordability for renters, and also the connection with like environmental issues and segregation, economic racial segregation as well. So I introduced myself. I actually used to work in eviction defense before this job. So let me bring up my notes really quick. Los Angeles is a place of diversity, and living here is about celebrating diversity. That's what makes Los Angeles special. So why are renters struggling in this city, and why are communities losing their diversity and character? The reason is really rooted in this suburban American dream. In post-war America, a housing boom in the suburbs was caused by the new availability of automobiles, highways, malls, and inexpensive housing construction. Massive amounts of natural habitats were raised to make way for this type of large housing based on the Levittown model, which had covenants making it 100% white. This image of a home was sold as the only valid aspiration for a family, which was expected to be a heterosexual nuclear family with traditional gender roles. Today, that suburban American dream still affects the way that we do housing planning. And one way that that legacy was perpetuated was through redlining. Redlining, the practice of refusing to lend money, give mortgages, or sell home insurance to people living in poor areas. And obviously, that was very racialized. So these were intentional acts of racial exclusion in land use and zoning around housing. And that's still, the borders of different zoned areas, areas zoned for different densities, closely match these borders of redlining. And the reason for that is that once this type of explicitly racist zoning and these explicitly racist practices were banned, exclusionary single family zoning took its place as like a proxy method. And it was effective and continues to be effective because single family homes are more expensive than multifamily apartment buildings. And I think, maybe kind of a theme I just want to touch on in this presentation, sort of the idea that multifamily apartment buildings are associated with, very negative stigma, and that's related to kind of like classism and racism. And so, kind of we need to think about undoing this legacy. And that's why places like New Zealand and Sacramento, other cities across the United States, are now banning exclusionary zoning. And so here's a graph just illustrating this point again, just the close relationship between racial segregation and single family zoning. And the yellow, you can see that the yellow being white, the white percentage goes up when you have like a higher percentage of single family zoning. I just want to give an example of how this plays out today from my own neighborhood in Santa Monica. On the left is a multifamily area with apartment buildings, lots of renters, lots of rent controlled units too. Just across the street, a block away, you cross over the zoning border to the single family area where only one family is allowed to live on a parcel. And you can see the character of these neighborhoods in terms of like these structures is very similar. But because, of this sort of zoning border, the homes on the right are 5 times more expensive. And on the left, not only are they cheaper, but more families can live in each of these buildings. So that's actually a 6-unit building on the left. So 6 families live there. And that affects the racial diversity of these areas as well. On the left side, we in that multifamily area have an 8% Black population. And then just by crossing that border, that drops down to a 0.8%. So, you know, I just sort of want to, obviously these are still both like very expensive areas, but there is a relationship between zoning and affordability and diversity. When exclusionary high cost neighborhoods don't build more apartment buildings, this drives gentrification regionally. So in these wealthier and whiter areas, when people, you know, when the children, when people with higher paying jobs aren't able to find housing there, or like, or, you know, they outcompete people in those neighborhoods to some degree. And then, you know, they also start looking to other neighborhoods. And so they drive more demand to lower income communities of color where apartment buildings were historically legalized in sort of like this redlining plan. So even though it's 2022, the idea of meeting more of our housing needs in these exclusionary white neighborhoods is considered a political third rail. So that means neighborhoods with existing renters, existing apartment buildings must bear all of this pressure to build the new housing. And, you know, that is not a plan for housing affordability, to just rebuild buildings that renters are already living in. You know, that creates displacement. You know, so we really need to be looking at areas where we can build new housing where there's owner occupied single family homes. You know, that reduces displacement. You know, many people mistakenly believe that low density suburban sprawl actually, that they think that that prevents overcrowding, but it's the opposite. Low density zoning causes more overcrowding because there just aren't enough homes for people to live in. Another example of sort of like the individual impact of low density single family zoning is illustrated in this slide. So, you know, I know somebody in my home city, Santa Monica, who works in a local job, and he was no longer able to afford the rent in the city because of the lack of housing, the lack of affordable housing. So he moved his family out to Lancaster, but he still works in Santa Monica. So that's a 2.5 hour commute each way. You know, that's a lot of time he's not spending with his family. That's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, you know, that he's being forced to contribute to. It's a lot of traffic. It also means that more natural habitats have to be raised for this suburban single family sprawl. It also contributes to higher energy use in places like this. You know, people who you know are sort of forced into exurban areas because of a lack of affordability are facing rising heats too. You know, I think this is really important and is often overlooked because the failure to accommodate more people, more housing in these cooler areas is a life or death issue for a lot of people. Plus, you know, exurban areas are extreme fire hazard areas. So, you know, this isn't a situation that he preferred. He was really forced in this situation because we weren't accommodating more housing here. We have a jobs housing imbalance. And so, you know, we're basically forcing our workers to do these mega commutes. So it's important to think about how this promise, this broken promise, in my opinion, of single family homes has led to our massive housing crisis, skyrocketing homelessness, overcrowding, and the fact that LA County is in the midst of a housing affordability and homelessness crisis. So you can see already this graph is out of date, but homelessness has continued to rise. And, you know, again, the reason for this is because single family homes restrict space for people. It's like it's land hoarding, basically. Not enough people can live in one neighborhood, even if that job has a lot of even if that neighborhood, sorry, has a lot of jobs and amenities. And so that is creating this issue of housing scarcity. And you can see from this chart, this chart is comparing the amount of housing scarcity to how high costs are. So LA is like over here on the extreme end with a huge amount of housing scarcity, very few homes per person, and very high costs. And that means like landlords can charge more and more for rent, really pushing people out and pushing people into homelessness. On the other hand, multifamily neighborhoods are diverse, vibrant, and walkable urban communities with mixed use areas. And yet the legacy of the suburban American dream still drives the discourse around multifamily housing with a very coded framing that needs to be unpacked. For example, more than 60% of LA residents are renters, but many residents still claim that multifamily apartment buildings are destroying the character of our neighborhoods. How can the very type of housing that most people live and rely on here be against our character? I think that's like coded anti-renter language. And, if you like unpack it a little bit further, sometimes people actually explicitly go there and they say, look, I don't want renters in my neighborhood. I don't want low income people. I don't want people of color in my neighborhood. It gets, people like sometimes use very exclusionary language around housing. When people say that apartment buildings are against neighborhood character, I think it's the opposite. I think that character is people, and it's the loss of people and diversity that's destroying our character. So I find it very strange, all this focus on buildings and height and not people, family, and needs. So here's some examples of the kind of language that I'm talking about. Okay, apartment buildings wreaking havoc on single family neighborhood communities. That's not reality. So, what could building housing look like that would help us make housing more affordable, make sure we have enough units for people, but also ensure that we're doing development without displacement. So one, equitable housing development. So we need to plan for the housing growth at the scale that we need, along with tenant protections and value capture as much as we can. Two, racial and economic justice. We want to make it a core goal of housing planning, use it as a lens for growth planning as much as possible. Affirmatively furthering fair housing. We want to open up exclusionary neighborhoods of opportunity by fairly distributing lower income targets. So that's sort of the idea of making sure neighborhoods of opportunity do their fair share of having affordable housing for everyone. One really important fact about that, a person's zip code where they grew up is more important for their health outcomes than their DNA. So by not giving people access to affordable housing in high opportunity areas, that's creating a lack of access to not only, economic opportunity, but like those better health outcomes as well. Another aspect for building a better housing future, of course, is environmental sustainability. So addressing our jobs housing imbalance with more homes, preventing the effects of sprawl, and reducing dependence on cars. And then I think another overlooked issue in this is diversity and representation and input. Like often when we see a community input process on a proposed project or a housing planning process, it'll be like the 50 most angry people from a neighborhood. And, studies also show that they are the more privileged people, like in terms of racial privilege, and they tend to be homeowners and wealthier. So that's what the evidence shows. And I think, those are obviously people who have more time to devote to getting involved with something like this. I think maybe like, honestly, like home values do go up when there's housing scarcity. So there's maybe like an economic incentive as well. And, that's what we kind of refer to this as like the NIMBY, not in my backyard problem. But, it's kind of a systemic issue in community input, because if you were to do a poll, like a representative poll or knock on people's doors, most people are okay or like, are neutral. And so I think, we're really missing a lot of voices. We're really especially missing the voices of renters, of lower income people, of people being displaced from these processes, and in their places, like the 50 angriest privileged people from the neighborhood. And so we need to do better processes for this that are actually statistically representative. So there's a lot that you can do as an individual on these issues. Abundant Housing wants to help, so please use this as a resource. Sign up on our website at the bottom here for action alerts and news. Get involved in your local group. Meet with your local electeds to discuss some of these issues. Join us for Housing 101 and our other educational events. And I put my email here at the bottom if anybody wants to reach out and get in touch, or if there are any questions or anything.
Thank you so much, Leonora, for that incredible walkthrough. You've actually answered quite a few of the questions that we had on tonight's agenda, so thank you for that. And with that, I think we can allow our other panelists to introduce themselves as well. And we can go ahead once Randall shares. Perfect. So up next, we have the Tenants Law Firm. If you could please introduce yourself and provide us with a description of your guys' work.
Hi, how are you guys? Thank you so much for having us. We're very, very excited to be here. And just by way of intro, I'm still in the office, so I don't know why it's blurred. It's just because it's such a messy desk at the moment. But yeah, we're working away today. My name is Daniel. I work at Tenants Law Firm, and what we do is we're a 501c3 based in Los Angeles. We focus on housing rights, tenant advocacy, and we really do it on the forefront in litigation is really the way we go. So what we try to focus on is anybody that's being wrongfully evicted from their homes. We represent a lot of tenants or former tenants, whether they're homeless, displaced from their homes or whatnot, in actions against landlords. And we're also trying to do our part to keep as much as possible tenants housed and staying in healthy homes. So that's really what our MO is, and that's really what we focus on. And we're just excited to contribute in any way here today and be involved with you guys.
Awesome, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, we have the Inner City Law Center.
Good evening. My name is Netta Jeha. I am the directing attorney of the Preventing and Ending Homelessness Project with the Inner City Law Center. A little bit about Inner City Law Center. We are a nonprofit law firm. We started in the 80s with just a solo attorney who set up shop on Skid Row, assisting people currently experiencing homelessness and in doing slum housing litigation. The operation grew larger and larger over time. We now have over 100 employees. We have many different practice areas. We represent tenants in eviction defense matters. We do veterans work. We do public benefits and CBEST work. We do, we have an advocacy project, and we are really wraparound civil legal services. My group that I'm here mostly to talk about is the Preventing Ending Homelessness Project. I also oversee our HIV law project. But the main mission of all of our work is really to stabilize housing, prevent homelessness, and help those who are currently experiencing homelessness regain housing, stable housing. So we work closely with agency partners. We work with other organizations throughout the city. In the Preventing and Ending Homelessness Project, I oversee the county efforts on that. So I work with a number of different other legal service providers. So for example, for the Palms, it would be in SPA 5, I believe, which would be, Zedek would be the legal service provider specifically for people who are residing in this neighborhood. So that's a little bit about what we do. In terms of the Preventing and Ending Homelessness Project, we do, of course, do some eviction defense work, but we really focus on all issues that could relate to stabilizing somebody's housing or helping them remove barriers to obtaining housing. So some of the things that we might do are things really beyond what other legal service providers do. We work with clients to expunge tickets, remove citations. We work with people to obtain restraining orders. Really anything. It's a huge, I can give a list, but it keeps going. It is really like wraparound services. What is needed to eliminate barriers to maximize income in a household, stabilize whatever is happening in the household, and either prevent eviction, prevent housing insecurity, or remove barriers so that people can then apply for housing and not, you know, maybe get rid of seal records from prior eviction cases. Excuse my language, I'm a recent transplant from New York. And I have been a tenants defense attorney for a very long time. I'm used to the lingo from there, but I'm getting used to the UD and unlawful detainer language, but it is a bit of a different vocabulary. It's the same thing though. It's eviction defense work. We also do help people around conditions and improving conditions. We also have an affirmative litigation team that does a lot of our slum housing litigation, bringing larger actions against landlords and bad actors, and a relatively new fair housing project. So that's a bit about what Inner City Law Center is doing. And I'm always happy to connect you with people in your neighborhood that can be of service.
Forgot to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Nada, for that wonderful explanation walkthrough. And may I also say, I hope you're enjoying the California weather a little bit more than New York. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right to the questions. You know, as I mentioned earlier, our first couple of questions were actually already answered. So thank you so much. So we can go ahead and actually go to the next slide to get some of our stakeholders' questions addressed. So this was submit, and thank you again to everyone that did submit questions. And please feel free to enter additional questions that you may have in the chat. If we have additional time, we will definitely get to those as well. So per the LAHD website, the City of Los Angeles' eviction moratorium will be in effect until February 7th, 2023, and will be extended as the city's state of emergency declaration is extended monthly. So the stakeholder wants to know if this means that they have to vacate their residence after February 7th per the Ellis Act eviction in the event of no further extension. So panelists, please feel free to answer the question. And yeah, I'll let you guys take it.
Well, I'll go ahead and start, although I do think I should punt to the true eviction defense attorney. But I would say that it doesn't, just because the eviction moratorium, when it expires, it doesn't mean you immediately need to go. In order to there's a process in being evicted from one's home, and that process is a legal process. It involves many stages. One thing we try to do in the PEP unit is prevent the litigation process from even commencing. So, you know, there's a negotiation stage that you can reach with your landlord prior to any court filings commencing. If a court filing has or is about to commence, you would get a notice from your landlord that you would need to leave. If that notice time period runs, then you may end up with an eviction filing, a UD being filed against you, at which time you have opportunity to answer and to respond and to defend your case. But in all of those cases, it is always helpful to, at the very least, consult with an attorney, if not be able to retain one, to help you through the process. You do not have to move out the day. The only time one has to truly move is if a marshal is there, or somebody is there with legal authority to change the locks and remove you from possession.
So I'll chime in. We're not eviction defense specialists by any means, since we usually let the parties that are doing this right now, legal aid, public counsel, where they're getting the funding right now to do eviction defense. So they've amassed a pretty sizable staff that's doing eviction defense. We unfortunately don't have any of that grant money, so we defer to them in that sense of it. But I will say just a few things about this, and without it being like legal advice, because it's a little bit vague. With the LSAC, you always have to keep in mind that number one, it just depends when do they get this. So if they're first getting notice of the LSAC, if they're elderly, handicapped, or children, they can then at that point make a request to have that be extended. So they could even extend their time there up to a year. So it's not really clear. I mean, I don't know exactly when in the process they are with this, but I think what you're looking at is at the very least, if you haven't already, and you are elderly, handicapped, or with children, you can actually ask for that full extension, and that would push it at least off for a year. There's going to be a lot of intricacies, which I don't know the facts here. At the same time, too, I wouldn't be the best person to advise on, but I think there's going to be plenty of resources. And if I'm not, I think you guys do eviction defense as well, right? So I think there'll probably be some attorneys in your office that know this front and back, but there's a lot of great resources out there right now for eviction defense. And I think that you could always find some people to go through the facts that you're dealing with to give you a very unique answer to your unique problem.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And so, along the same lines, I guess, what rights does a renter face when facing potential eviction? It sounds like, per your earlier responses, they are quite extensive. And I guess how would, if you feel that question has already been answered, how would an individual seek to get back into housing? Say that they've already been evicted and now they are unhoused and want to seek housing.
This one I could take, and I'm sure you guys could all jump in. And so it sounds like, firstly, if they're facing potential eviction, that's one phase of it. And I think Nada was kind of explaining this, that you might want to try and nip it at the bud whenever possible, avoid the litigation to begin in the first place. So when you're getting faced with a 3-day notice or 30-day notice or whatnot, there's always the opportunity to try to prevent the unlawful detainer to even begin and to start that course. Because a lot of times, once that train starts running, it's just a lot of time and resources that are put into that. But if you're facing the potential eviction at first, there's always opportunities to, again, prevent it. And a lot of that is workouts with your landlord, not even to be a buyout, but there's always things that could be worked on, negotiated. There could be the threat of the fact that you're going to get a defense attorney. So if there's no real valid cause for that eviction, they're going to realize they're going to end up wasting a lot of time and money to bring an eviction that's ultimately going to fail. And the way it is right now, with certain things factored in, if they lose that eviction proceeding, they could be stuck paying your attorney's fees as well. So that's a big deterrent for them to proceed on a really frivolous type of unlawful detainer. In the past, they were just bringing these unlawful detainers left and right because they said, hey, we'll drive you out, we'll bully you out. You don't have the funds to pay for an attorney. Thankfully, now we have a lot of this, in a way, right to counsel for eviction defense. And there's so many great organizations and fantastic attorneys doing this now. Landlords aren't able to bully you out unless it's for cause. So I think the secondary part of it is if there actually was an eviction, how would an individual seek to get back into housing? Again, I think it's asking if you've already been evicted, if it's a for cause, which means that you had an opportunity, you had your day in court, and you actually got a judgment, and it was followed by a sheriff's lockout, there isn't much to get back into that specific house. If there's anything that was wrongful about that, if, for example, somebody just locked you out, or they threw out your stuff and all that, yes, 100% you could get back in. The first thing you should do is call the police. Call the police and show that you actually have a right to be in there, and the police will come and actually help you get back in or change the locks or whatever it is to allow you back access. And if for whatever reason that didn't work and you needed a law firm or whatnot, we can help with that. But if there was a for cause eviction with a judgment and a sheriff's lockout, to get back into that housing is not really an option that I can see. I think the next question is, where is it that you could find housing at that point? And Lenora, you probably would have a lot more to say or help with that aspect of it. But if somebody was wrongfully evicted or constructively evicted, that's where, yes, you have rights to come back in. You do have opportunities to come back in. And that's where I say that before there's been a judgment, there is an opportunity.
Thank you so much for that response. And I'll go ahead and let the two other panelists speak to this question.
I just want to chime in that has been eviction and it was unlawful eviction. Timing is very important. So if it has been a fairly long time ago and somebody else is living there, you may be facing a much steeper uphill battle to get back in. And we're going to say this over and over again, Every case is unique. It is that everything we're saying is very generalized, and it is always worthwhile having an individual consultation with an attorney. But you know, in terms of an illegal lockout, absolutely consult with somebody.
Thank you. And so, pending any further comments from our additional panelists, we can go ahead and move to our next question.
I just wanted to mention one thing. I don't practice eviction defense anymore, so I'm probably not really qualified to answer this question anymore. But I do just want to point out that in my eviction defense days, one thing that I found was just how difficult it was to find alternative affordable housing for clients. Like, so I mean, that's sort of not directly related to this question, but you know, I think you know, people often come to us and are requesting help finding affordable housing, and you know, we try to point them towards resources, but I do think this is a really big issue. Just we don't have enough units, and so I think, you know, again, we kind of need to think about like these sort of like larger systemic issues of how housing is being planned and built. But yeah, anyway, sorry, thanks for letting me jump in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. That was perfect. And I think that was, I think, our intention in bringing this conversation, opening this conversation, is that, you know, we have to think about a multi-pronged approach. If we only think about housing affordability, right, without helping out renters who are having issues, then we're going to be in the same problem, right? If we're only helping out renters, but not really thinking about the development of our housing and how much it costs and whether it's how it's zoned and those things, then, you know, we're only kind of tackling part of the problem. So I really appreciate all our panelists, and each of your approaches, I think, are important for a community like Palms, and for helping our community to thrive.
Thank you. So with that, we will go ahead and go into the next question. So these next questions are a few scenarios that were submitted by our stakeholders here in Palms. So the first being, in the event that a tenant has lived in the same residence for 10 plus years, is there a requirement or law around improvements for their specific unit, such as carpet, appliance replacements from the landlord? You know, is this strictly based on how worn or like wear or tear, things like that? So I'll go ahead and open that to the panelists.
And if this is not your area of expertise, or you don't know, that's okay. We want to do a little research.
Literally about to say, we can definitely get a little bit more research if none of you feel comfortable answering this particular question.
I'll say a little bit to it. Look, there's a general, so a lot of these things, it's not specifically there has to be a certain amount of dates, but it's more about what's going to deem it to be habitable, right? So if you start having certain things that become, so again, improvements such as carpet and appliances. Appliances is a big thing we got to talk about. Like, I don't know what we're going to consider an appliance, but if it's a necessity type of appliance, it's a bigger thing. If it's a washer dryer, I'm not sure what exact appliance again we're referring to, but and I hate to say it depends, but it really does depend. But let's go back to habitable is really the key word you want to see. And you want to see, is it going to be deemed that it's habitable or not? Is it that the carpets have had such significant wear and tear? Has it not been cleaned for 20 years? I remember somewhere, and please don't quote me on this, but I remember, and this is not at all should be quoted, I'm going to regret saying this on recorded, but I know that there's, I think, a practice that every 8 years you could request it to be maintain the carpets at least. But really, it's just the question of habitable. If you have completely destroyed the carpets because you're doing something on the carpets that probably is not what its main course of its use is for, that's one thing. But if it's just over wear and tear type of things, and it deems it to stop being habitable, or there's maybe a leak that occurred and that led for there to be, you know, some mildew or mold building up on the carpets, things like that is the main question. If you feel like it's uninhabitable, you can explain to the landlord, always put it in writing. Don't do it over the phone. Don't do it any other way. Put it in writing, show them why you think it's uninhabitable, and document it and give it to them and put it in front of them. Hopefully they do the right thing and get it cleared up. If they don't, at least you've documented it, you've tried and whatnot. And again, there's going to be great resources that'll be able to help you if they don't do those repairs. But I think, again, the key word is going to be what's, and this you could look up again what specific things you're talking about. But the keyword is habitable and see what you find. Otherwise, anybody from any of the, Inner City Law Center, I'm sure you could call them and they'd be able to help you, or ourselves or some other law firm can kind of help you specifically look at the question.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just would love to chime in and say that there is, I can't answer this. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I would have to look into some of it, but there is a difference between an improvement and maintenance. So, there is the home needs to be maintained in a habitable condition. And again, habitable is the key word. Is it livable? But an improvement to me implies a new stove or a new oven to renovate, to make it nicer. And there is no real obligation for a landlord or an owner to make improvements for aesthetic or quality, better quality of life reasons. If what's old is working and it makes it livable, that's fine. So I would, it is kind of, one has to kind of check their expectations on a landlord's responsibility in this area. However, if it is uninhabitable, if there is an infestation, if there is, if the carpet is so old that the staples are coming up, and you're cutting yourself on walking on it, my goodness, that's not inhabitable. That would be something that would need to be repaired. But again, that would be more of a maintenance issue. It's getting so run down, it needs to be maintained. It's no longer working, versus making it nicer and improving the looks or the modernness of the home.
Thank you to both of you for that. And I guess along the same lines, and you mentioned documenting and getting it in writing in order for it to properly be assessed. What additional recourse really is there? Is it really just kind of finding an organization to help, with your very specific case, or are there general guidelines that a person can start to look towards as they kind of navigate this process? I'm seeing some head nods. I think that's a good thing. Oh, yes, please go ahead.
I guess I have a question for the others. That if a complaint to LAHD or the federal housing department, what might be an option in a severe situation?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, it depends what's going on. If you're having, mold issues going on, automatically call public health. If it's it depends, again, just call the city. If it's a structural issue, you call building and safety. But yeah, between those three, public health department, housing department, it used to be HCID, I think they changed the acronym recently, or just calling LADBS or building safety department. It's going to be the way to go, I think. And that usually in our experience, I've seen number one way to get the landlord to act is actually is getting somebody from the city to intervene, because they're going to be fined for that. And if they don't do the repairs within 35 days, or if it's really extreme within a 2-day period, you're going to get fined again. And sometimes hitting them in their pocket is going to get the quickest result.
Sure.
Also about the notice or writing it down, it's very important to get things like this in writing and to be able and keep your paper trail, to be able to show when you provided the notice of the condition and that nothing was done. Because when you are, eventually, if it is a significant enough condition that there can be some legal recourse, you do need to show when you notified them that the issue was there and that nothing had been done. And that's really when the clock starts ticking for when you can say this damage has, or this issue has existed and nothing has happened. So by absolutely, emails, super easy. Even text messages are easy to keep a paper trail of. I think email is best because it's a bit more formal. It has the date and time stamp and you don't lose it. But, keep things in writing, communications in writing. Doesn't mean you need to send a handwritten letter. postmark it and, mail it by certified mail, but it does, an email would be very helpful there.
Thank you to all of our panelists for their input on that particular question. And the next one is a bit more specific, so please feel free to let us know if it can't be answered. But along those same lines, we had a stakeholder that mentioned that one of their apartments or their apartment that they were a tenant of was becoming inaccessible and inhabitable. Two things that kind of sound like, that's when they can go ahead and take action. And this was due to just construction repairs, and it occurred for a significant amount of time. And so the stakeholder asked, in the event that they do come to some sort of an agreement with the landlord regarding rent, is there a way to an equation or like conversations that they can have to ensure that whatever deduction is given is equitable to the amount of time and how their living space was affected? And I'll go ahead and give this some time. Please go ahead.
I can't answer specific percentages or numbers. However, there are formulas that are used through just case law and the way things run. So this is an exact area where one should consult with an attorney particular to your issue.
Thank you. Wonderful. So I think we can go ahead and jump to the next question.
Sorry, I didn't want to hog all the talk, but the previous two, I was going to say there's actually specifically under HCI DLA, there's actually a bulletin that tells you if you have a loss of amenities or if you have a loss of services, specifically talking about washer dryer, gym is included, pool is included, all those things are actually included. It gives you an amount that they think is a fair amount for rent abatement or deduction of your rent. So you could actually use that specific amount. Now, I'm very hestant, I'm going to put this out there, I'm very hesitant to tell tenants to do what's called like basically withholding rents, because usually what that does is it's just going to lead the landlord to say, okay, you didn't pay your full rent, now I'm going to evict you for non-payment of rent. What I always say is document what you have, document all this, and basically coming back and say, look, I didn't get my proper amenities this year, I didn't get this month or these 6 months or 9 months, whatever it is, or I didn't have access to the gym and pool, which is explicitly in the lease. It states that I have access to gym or pool or other amenities. And when it comes down to it, keep paper trails of it later on. It's much easier to come back and get those rents get it abated than having to come and risk your housing over or have the risk of the stress and all the stuff that goes with actually having to defend an eviction. Meaning be in the driver's seat of that situation, be in the offensive rather than be in the defensive. So I always push tenants pay for it, keep a paper trail of it later, come after it. And then also what we're seeing right now with the construction repairs, I think it falls along the same exact line. I think New York, and I don't know if you heard of this, I learned this from New York law actually. There's a new concept of noise harassment, or construction harassment, which is that in New York, it's becoming more and more common that landlords are starting to do renovations purposely or almost annoyingly enough that it drives neighboring units out of their apartments because all they're hearing is prolonged construction and the dust and debris and everything that's going on in their places. So it's becoming a real thing that's happening. I think we have a few cases of that happening like right now in Los Angeles. We're representing multiple tenants in the building where they're also being almost forcibly driven out by the harassment of the construction or the annoyance and the nuisance of it. But it's something to keep in mind that, again, that does, inaccessibility, by the way, again, is a big thing. If you don't have the ability to get to your unit in a safe way, if there isn't clear, like, egress ways and methods to get to your apartment, you're dodging through scaffolding and you're going through and like bricks are falling on your head, that's a serious issue. So I think that's even, that's definitely something to look into. You might want to consult an attorney about that part of it. But also, yeah, the uninhabitable, all that, keep track of it later on, get it deducted from your rent after you've paid it. Don't try to self-deduct and give yourself, the opening for the landlord to come and evict you over. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Great 2 cents. I want to add one more thing. There is a relatively new anti-harassment statute or ordinance that it has come into effect and that essentially penalizes a landlord from harassing a tenant. And some of the ways are through repeated lack of repair of conditions, as well as other harassing behaviors. So it is a relatively new ordinance, but the damages that could be associated with it can get quite high. So it is, there is a new relief here. Yes, it is. And I have seen in my experience in New York some pretty horrific constructive eviction. I'm not going to say full evictions. It's an eviction because it's so impossible to live somewhere through construction, neighboring construction, or even a construction, you know, on that actual apartment, but they just go and rip out all the basic necessities. So it is something to keep an eye out for. Hopefully we don't get there in LA. It is a horrible thing, and no one ever wants to come back from there, right? You want to beat things before they get there and stay on top of things, which is, again, document, try and get legal advice specific to your case.
Absolutely. And thank you for all of that wonderful information. I know our stakeholders will definitely appreciate it as they're navigating these cases. So going to our last stakeholder scenario. So this is an individual that has lived in a rent stabilized apartment with 18 units for the last 5 years. They noted that 2 years after they moved in, a new owner bought this building, which, you know, a lot of people tend to see, especially in Los Angeles. And so each time a tenant moved out, the apartment would be completely renovated. And so when this individual saw these renovations taking place, you know, specifically around air conditioning, for example, they asked the manager if, you know, they could install a unit, and they were willing to share the cost because they understood, you know, this is an improvement. So her response, or the response she received was, you know, no can do, because other tenants that have been living here prior to the new owner coming in would ask for this too. So she's asking, what are actions that she can take given the manager's response? Is there really any action that she can take at all, given that these are improvements based on what we've been hearing? And so to extend to this question, I guess, you know, is there even the opportunity for her to be reaching out to the landlord for these things?
I would just say that this, I think Nada brought this up earlier, and I think she was spot on. They don't have a necessity, or they don't have the obligation to give you renovations. Especially, you see this a lot of times, newer units or might get, you know, upgrades or facelifts or whatever's going on. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be your specific unit is also getting those same, you know, renovations done to it. So again, it'd be nice if they did it. It'd be nice if you said you want to shoulder some of the costs with them, but I don't think there's any legal obligation for them to do so unless it was non-functioning, unless it was deemed uninhabitable, unless there was, you know, something to it that was making it, you know, an issue that needed to be repaired.
Yeah, and the only thing that kind of comes to my mind aside from that is a potential reasonable accommodation for medical or some sort of, you know, disability related issues. So, you know, if there is a medical necessity to have that air conditioning, that may be something that one would bring up as a reasonable accommodation in order to accommodate them. But again, yeah, I don't see how that is necessary at this time. But again, everything is specific to its case. It's hard to see it right here.
Definitely. No, and thank you for that guidance.
I have one related question that came in a little bit later. Someone had a question around what accessible housing means for someone who might have or be experiencing a disability that's either probably a permanent disability. So for instance, for someone who is wheelchair bound or primarily wheelchair bound, what would accessible housing, is there a common definition that this person might think about when thinking about housing for themselves?
A very general answer regarding reasonable accommodations is it needs to be an accommodation that suits the disability, and it also has to be a reasonable request, right? So if this person is renting in a 2-family house and there is no other, you know, each of the units really don't work because of, you know, the size of the building, the structure of it. it isn't necessary, it's not reasonable to say, oh, you need to go find me a home in another building, because there is no way to really accommodate it. It's a blend of both being, it's an accommodation that is also can be reasonably accommodated, if that makes sense. So, you know, really it's finding the home that would work for that particular disability. And then if you're currently living in a home, say you're on a, you know, 3 flights up, and there may be an apartment available on the 1st floor at, you know, a similar rent, then that might be a perfect fit for a reasonable accommodation. You just need to make that request. But it really depends on what is reasonable also.
Thank you.
So moving on to our next slide. Awesome. So we did touch upon just now, speaking to the resources available for individuals with disabilities that are seeking ADA compliant accessible housing. So we can go ahead and address, you know, could you please detail the type of benefits that are available to our unhoused neighbors and how they can access them?
In terms of benefits available to the unhoused neighbors, you know, there are organizations, and the city has some, you know, I mean, frankly, it's a very difficult situation to say what's available. There are not enough shelter places in the city, or adequate shelter in the city for people who are unhoused. And people who are unhoused may not want or may not be able to access what is available if a shelter placement or you know, a project room, key room is available. So there are agencies that work within each spa that do outreach to all of the encampments. We at Inner City Law Center have an outreach coordinator who goes and meets with people and tries to connect them with services. But it is always an individual choice. You know, a lot of the options for temporary housing don't provide space for an animal. Sometimes they're not available for couples. And, you know, there may be a lot of restrictions around the type of temporary services that are available. So there are, I would say that if that's something somebody is particularly interested in, LASA, LASA has outreach teams that go out and about to the encampments and to different areas where unhoused people can congregate, and tries to provide services or do provide services, you know, even whether it's, you know, toiletry kits, or we certainly provide ways to link up with legal services, like I said, to try and remove the barriers around obtaining housing, as well as there are some immediate needs that might, you know, need to be addressed. But there are service providers who do come out. You can always call the city and try and connect with providers to, you know, get that home assistance. If you are a person who is currently experiencing homelessness, by all means, you may reach out to, I can give you our email for citywide, countywide services, and I can connect you with whomever would be appropriate in your area. And that email is PEP, stands for Preventing Ending Homelessness Project, PEP, PEHP, info, INFO, at innercitylaw.org.
Thank you so much for that. And pending any of our other panelists having a response to this question, we can go ahead and move on to our next one. I'm not seeing anything.
That was a great answer, I thought. Thank you for that great thorough answer.
Awesome. So now, you know, a question that kind of came up was building-wide lawsuits. So if you have several tenants in any given, I guess, apartment building, you know, how would one go about initiating one, and examples that would warrant one if you're facing similar situations as other tenants in your building are and you kind of want to do something about it? And I did notice that this was one of the services that is offered by tenants. So I guess we can go ahead and start there.
Sure. So the first thing is, in terms of how you could go about initiating one, like one of the main things you could do is, firstly, informally, you want to kind of see how many people are having similar issues as you and get a feel for that. One of the things you could do to protect yourself is you could actually start a tenants union, and you are going to have added protections in the sense if you create a union, and there's organizations that can help you create a union, or, you know, like a firm like ourselves, I'm sure in a city as well could help you with this, but we could help you creating the tenants union. I do think it's very important at times to have that union, and it doesn't even have to be so formal, but just having power in numbers is something that's very important. And having the building wide, having tenants that are joining together, one of the things that tends to happen is that we do a lot of single plaintiff actions as well. We don't only do building wide, we do single plaintiffs, but quite often what you could see is that we never push our tenants to leave. We always want them to, you know, stay unless they want to leave, or unless it's a health or safety issue. If it's a health or safety issue, or a doctor is advising to leave, or their literal health is an issue, we'll tell them it might be best to leave in those sense. But otherwise, we don't really want to push them out. But what we see is that there's sometimes retaliation from the landlord, there's bullying happening from the landlord, there's different things that occur. And one of the things that or just an eviction proceeding is brought. So one of the things that we say is that when you have those power in numbers, it deters the landlord from bringing an eviction against everybody. It deters the landlord from harassing everybody or bring any type of bully tactics against everyone. So initiating it is really just getting the people together. And once you have that people together, you know, we're happy to help. I'm sure there's other organizations out there happy to help. We can even help you guys get the tenants together, all that stuff, aspects of it. And then examples that could warrant one, this is all across the board. It could be from, you know, the fact that it's uninhabitable. It could be from the fact that they're harassing everybody. It could be from the fact that there's no elevator in a building with multiple floors and elderly people in it and handicapped people that can't have full access. It could be over, there's plethoras of issues, and it could even be, for example, that nobody has access to some of the amenities that we talked about previously. But I think if there's some issues in the building wide, we see a lot of cases where there's bed bugs or there's rodents or rats or roaches or whatnot. If there's stuff that are going on that are building wide and affects everybody systematically, it probably could warrant, and we're happy to review it with you. If anybody has these types of cases, we're more than happy to go through it with you and tell you if it's something we could take in and if it would warrant one or not. But usually if it's something that's affecting the whole building, it probably would warrant the building wide lawsuit.
Thank you so much for that. Awesome. And so I think we can go ahead and move on to our what will be our second to last question. Can you please speak to the role development plays in displacement and homelessness? I know that we briefly touched upon this at the beginning of the presentation, but would love, you know, all the panelists kind of to speak to this one if you can. Please go ahead.
So, I mean, I think there's two sides to this because, you know, I think one point I was hoping to make with my presentation is that a lack of development also contributes to displacement and homelessness. You know, when people outcompete for a scarce amount of housing and demand is driven to certain neighborhoods, that does cause a lot of displacement and homelessness. And I think also, again, you know, the issue of single family zoning, you know, drives housing development that does happen to places with existing renters and existing apartment buildings. But, you know, abundant housing believes that tenants should be protected as we do development. So, you know, we're in strong support of policies like the right of return, like if there is a development, like making sure that you know, tenants have the opportunity to return at the same rent and benefit, you know, ultimately from that development that occurred. And, you know, I think like we should be very mindful of like sort of macro housing planning, you know, if it doesn't address sort of that displacement issue. So I hope that answers the question.
Definitely. And as a follow-up to that, if I may also kind of ask, in terms of, you know, what the public can, in those, you know, the stakeholders that are currently watching, what they can do to have a more present role when it comes to developments such as these, because normally, you know, they're not necessarily announced to the larger scale community. I guess, would you recommend any meetings that they should attend, or what ways to better inform themselves? Would you recommend just visiting Abundant Housing LA to kind of get a deeper understanding of what that would entail? Any recommendations that you have, we'd love to share with our stakeholders.
Yeah, I definitely hope people, you know, reach out to Abundant Housing, see if like it's something maybe we can help, you know, support in terms of advocacy, or if not, you know, something that we are able to do is sometimes refer people to partner organizations like YIMBY Law that that do actually get involved when in developments that will be displacing renters. So, you know, I think after SB 330 passed, which like has demolition protections for renters, you know, it's like intended to kind of protect against this situation. You know, like a partner like YIMBY Law can get involved and like write a letter about how it's like an SB 330 violation. You know, kind of like investigate other legal issues that might be involved there. So I would definitely encourage people to reach out to us. And, you know, if there's an opportunity maybe to like to advocate for, you know, right of return in that situation, maybe we can be helpful in thinking through that as well.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to our final question for the evening. If we could go ahead and move to the next slide. Awesome. So we'd love to give, you know, all of our wonderful panelists the space to speak to some of the projects that each of your organizations are currently spearheading, and how individuals can either get involved or inform themselves. You know, if there's anything that you're particularly working on right now that you'd like to voice, please do so now. Please go ahead, Lenora.
Thanks. Yeah. So Abundant Housing has been, you know, helping advocate for in the housing element update process, which is a long-term housing planning process that's required by the state, you know, making sure that cities do the affirmatively furthering for housing, plan for enough housing, you know, and ensure that there's, you know, equitable plans for development and affordable housing production. And so if you're interested in that, learning about, you know, how that process is going in your own neighborhood, you know, please reach out. And you know, another issue that we're working on is sort of ensuring the implementation of the housing elements. I think that's going to be more important in the coming years, especially, you know, in the city of LA. We advocated for an equitable distribution plan of housing throughout the neighborhoods, you know, and again, sort of like concentrating housing production in just like a few neighborhoods of renters. So I think that is something to really be on top of if people are interested, because I guess you know, even though the city council did seem very amenable to an equitable distribution, I think like actually implementing something like that is politically very difficult for LA City Council. And so I think it's going to be really important for advocates to get involved. Plus there's lots of important issues going on in people's local communities. So please reach out and we can connect you to whatever might be going on in your local jurisdiction.
Thank you so much for that. And inner city law and tenants, is there any services that you'd like to highlight on?
In addition, I think I touched on the services that we provide. A couple things I want to note is that we are working on the right to counsel, bringing the right to counsel to Los Angeles in a more meaningful way, like a true right to counsel, meaning there would be an automatic attorney appointed in any sort of eviction case for tenants. I also want to highlight that, strengthening and expanding the LARSO regulations would be very important, including, making sure that there is an expansion and I think we're very far away from this, but, you never know with political will, creating more protections because it creates more stability and actually a more a stable income base for landlords as well. So increasing and stabilizing those regulations.
Thank you. And finally, tenants.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we actually are trying to build up and do at the moment is, for those that are interested, we're trying to actually develop more of a tenant outreach and tenant organizing arm of what we do. And it's a new initiative that we're trying to put together to try in Los Angeles and greater LA, and even hopefully expand to more of Southern California. But if anybody was really interested in that, or that they have a background in that, or passion for that, and would like to reach out, that's something that we are trying to put together and help other people have a lot more awareness of what the resources are out there for them.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And with that, we'd also like to share in the next slide all of these wonderful organizations' contact information. So we have both their social media accounts as well as their websites. And please feel free to all those that are listening to reach out to our Palms NC email address as well, should you have any further questions or comments about tonight's presentation. And yeah, with that, I'd like to go ahead and give it over to Randall for any closing comments.
Yeah. As we're closing, I'm just taking a look at, I did activate the Q&A feature. So I just want to make sure that we answer these questions as well. There was a question. Someone asked the question, can a landlord ask to see what is in their person's storage unit in their garage parking spot regarding a fumigation process? So it seems like maybe the landlord or manager trying to fumigate is asking to inspect the tenant's storage unit or storage space. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
And so.
Okay, perfect. So there was a couple of questions that were very, very specific that I think that we're going to encourage that stakeholders reach out to and consult with a lawyer possibly, because I think that probably the answer couldn't be generally provided in this space. But I just want to thank everyone. I think I'm super grateful for Inner City Law, Tenants Law Firm, and Abundant Housing, all of our guests today, for your expertise, for just sharing your time with us. I know that many of your organizations also engage in work like this on your own. And so we also happily share and repost and promote when you are having workshops and opportunities that folks can come and learn. But I'm super just impressed with the Palms community. We had about 24 stakeholders on the call today. And that's a lot of folks who are having access to direct to all the information that you all shared. As I mentioned, we're also going to take the recording and kind of put it into some kind of smaller chunks and kind of share out some of the responses that you all provided so that we can continue to just leverage your expertise and knowledge and share it just with folks who may not have been able to make it tonight. So just thank you so much for partnering with us. I think tonight went super well for it being our first time. So thank you so much for your partnership.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and if there are any ways that we can partner with you to help to continue to promote your work and the work that you all do for Angelinos and for folks who live in Palms, please don't hesitate to let us know if we can also be a service to you.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for all your hard work.
No,
All right, and so
at all.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, not to be cheesy at all, but thank you. As I recently joined the neighborhood council, so it's really wonderful to have had such experts on the subject matter attend this, because I know that you are all very, very busy. So we really appreciate all of your input tonight.
Yes, and so folks, this committee will be back on our regular meeting schedule. This is not necessarily our regular meeting time. And so we'll be back on our regular schedule in February. The Palms NC has a General Assembly meeting the first Wednesday of each month. That will be this coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. So folks are invited to that space as well. And I hope that folks stay safe. Have a good night. Thank you so much.